2011 Planning Commission special meeting. So Dennis, can we have a roll call?
Commissioner Magnow.
Here.
Commissioner Bockenstedt. Commissioner Coronado.
Here.
Commissioner Elrod. Commissioner Gallagher. Commissioner Newfinke.
Here.
Commissioner Metcalf.
Here.
Commissioner Ranville.
Here.
Commissioner Samuelson.
Here.
Steve called and apologized that he was going to be absent tonight.
So I thought we'd go over the agenda real quick. First is talking about the workshop and maybe identifying potential dates and subject matters. So, and then the second would be to address, to continue with our review of the goals and policies, starting with the CN4D, and then at the end discuss about how we're going to go forward with this process. So do we have any additions or objections to the agenda? No? Anything else? All right, so let's just jump into the workshop. So what I thought is maybe we can identify a couple dates, and I know it's going to be difficult to actually set those dates in stone until the new Director of Community Development comes in. So I thought that we could throw out a couple dates.
We were looking at, Glenn arrives on May 16th, and so we thought we should at least give him a couple weeks, and it'd be nice if he were actually here for one of the meetings with Planning Commission, I think, before you had the annual meeting, so we can kind of get a sense of how the board's functioning and any issues that he might have as well. So I would think at least the first part of June or some in that range at least, so whatever works for us.
How does June 4th look for everybody?
Works for me, but the only date in June that does.
Yeah, we thought we'd just put some...
That is actually not good for me.
Not good? Okay.
That's a Saturday?
Yeah.
Let's say we're looking at Saturday, so it's June 4th. It doesn't work for a couple of us. And David, you said you've got some problems on the 11th, the 18th, and 25th. I've got troubles on the 25th and the 18th, too, so...
I can either make the 11th work or not.
Okay.
11th is, anything after the 11th is fine.
Nothing after that, okay.
How about the rest of you guys?
11th is fine for me.
Okay. So we can tentatively look at the 11th. Are there other dates?
Or Craig said you had anything after the 11th.
Well, the 11th.
Oh, it does work
also
as
is
well.
fine,
Okay, June 11th may work. Anybody it doesn't work for? Okay. Okay, let's look at some other days, too, because, again, we don't know what Glenn's schedule is going to be either, so what other meetings he's got planned or other commitments he has. 18th and the 25th don't work for you. Okay. Let's go into July. The second is the 4th of July weekend, probably not a good idea. 9th or 16th? Anybody have trouble with the 9th?
Not good for me.
Okay, 16th. Okay, 23rd. Okay, 30th.
Is this workshop really predicated on having the new director here?
Well, I would think it would be, just because he's going to be setting direction, and he needs to know what you guys want to get done as well, I would think. I think if I were the new director, I'd feel a little frustrated, I think, if they'd had their annual meeting right before I arrived. So we could look at another day, I suppose, too. We could look at, Friday evening after work and just, going through, going later or something, too. We could get, 5 hours in or something, maybe 5 to 10, something like that we could do as well, if that works better for folks.
What about May 21st?
You mean?
And that's like only 5 days that...
Oh, after he's been here, yeah. I don't think that'd be enough time for, I would guess. So, 28th would give him 2 weeks, but that's Memorial Day weekend, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, that's
Yep.
not good.
I mean, maybe I'm misremembering, but I thought we would use these workshops in the past for two purposes. One, to get the new appointees acquainted with the old ones and vice versa, and two, to set the schedule, the calendar, if you will, the list of things that we wanted to work on for the coming year. We keep waiting to July, the year's going to be gone, we might as well wait till next spring. So, I don't know that in the past, of course, the last 2 years you've been acting director, so that's kind of been self-fulfilling. I don't know that in the past it's made much difference. I mean, it's basically other than the preparation that you guys have put into specific topics that we've identified as part of the agenda, we pretty much have set our own agenda. So I'm wondering why we're going to wait an extra 3 months.
Well, we could try a different day, too, I suppose. I mean, we could do, if Friday nights work for anybody. So you're gone basically all of June and July, Dave?
Off and on, other than the first part of June.
So every weekend, though? The second week in June through all of July?
Depends on when my wife makes plane reservations.
Okay. Well, I guess that's the issue, too. I mean, we're not sure we have to set it quite yet, either. We're just trying to hold dates for everybody and see what might be available. So.
I think it's a good idea to have the new director here. I don't want to wait either. I think we should try to do it during June if we possibly can, or the second weekend in July at the latest.
So are we going to wait on the draft for this section of the comp plan as well?
No.
Since that's the most significant thing we've got on tap for the next several months, we're not going to wait on that for the new director, but we're going to, okay.
Well, should we see if June 11th works for everybody and
Okay.
kind of target that date? And if not, maybe pick 2 weekday nights and meet like a couple hours here and a couple hours there. And plus, I think once we go through a potential agenda, it's going to, timeframes will probably sort itself out.
That'd probably be a good idea, is to start putting agenda items together.
Okay, so should we do that now? Let me mention what we did in May 2nd of 2009. We talked about legal issues and procedures. Suzanne talked about that. Development and zoning issues, implications and procedures by Jan and Ernie. Zoning code enforcement procedures and implications by Pam Hale. And we addressed administrative issues, preparation for open houses. And then on the May 3rd, 2008, we had another legal basis for planning, and we talked about the City Council and Planning Commission direction. We did a walking tour, and we also discussed small area planning and what that means to the Planning Commission. Those are some of the topics that came up in the previous meetings, and then we talked about the PDO, talking about the PDO and the TIS process, the minutes, parking, scheduling debriefs for public hearings, discussing changes to the Planning Commission rules and procedures, and I think those are some of the topics that I heard everybody say. So which ones are important, and what do you guys like the best?
I guess I'd really appreciate doing the change of the rules for the meetings as an agenda item for that. I think that's a really appropriate time. I guess you kind of step back a little bit in terms of the intent of the annual meeting is to give us a little bit more time to have kind of a full discussion and really open discussion on items. The items that have come up during the year that you have questions about, you'd like a little bit more direction on, a lot more discussion from Planning Commission in terms of how we operate or particular background. And I think the legal issues is always a good one, just because Suzanne and the other city attorneys have always done a great job in terms of saying, you know, here are the ins and outs and changes, and there's always more to say about the legal issues. So that's a good one, comes as a standard. Other than that, it's kind of what are the hot topics for you guys, and what do we need to discuss? The minutes is another one we'll talk about. I think it's an appropriate place to talk about that, what functions best and what makes sense. So I think those are 2 agenda items from my perspective that kind of rise to the top immediately.
And for me also, a calendar is going to be really important to discuss what are the hot topics that we need to get done and how do we need to present to City Council, for example, the parking and the PDO and the TIS, and how are we going to slate that in? Sorry, Craig.
That's exactly what I was going to suggest, was the PDO, TIS, and parking as being 3 of the primary issues. If we could do sort of a briefing on where those are at, and maybe better understand how the PDO and TIS work together to impact the development process.
Right. Perfect. That'd be great. Okay. Suzanne, we're potentially looking at an annual meeting on Saturday, June 11th. I don't know if... And we just volunteered you to do a legal session. So.
I should be around.
Okay.
Saturday, June 11th?
Saturday, June 11th, yeah.
Okay. I don't know.
And we're going to wait till Glenn gets here to confirm this and just, see what everybody else's schedule looks like. We thought we'd just try and set it aside if we could.
Linda, as part of schedule or calendar, were you thinking about direction or where we go with comp plan after we finish the downtown section?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I really think we need to do that because we've got to get on city council's schedule too. Or at least that's my impression, that we need to do that. So how about, what about perhaps sending your priorities by email to Dennis for the meeting? Like ranked?
Yeah, so we kind of assign time frames and kind of a sense of how they fit together. That'd be great.
Yeah, and what your priorities are and how we can pull them together.
Can you send last year's agenda out to everybody
Absolutely.
via email?
Yeah.
As a starting point?
Yeah, we can send a couple. They're fairly similar from year to year, but absolutely.
Any other comments on the subject?
So we're going to talk about PDOs, TIS, and parking after we issue the downtown comp plan section?
Yeah, I think so in terms of implementation, which is what City Council is talking about. As long as you've got enough direction in the plan in terms of what you're trying to achieve, then I think the implementation is more detailed. So that the discussion follows there.
And we may have to go back and revise what we've done based on all those discussions, but at least we've got a starting point with the plan that we have today.
It's going to be revised anyways, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sure will.
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Any other comments on that? So should we go to CN4D? That was where we last left off, right? 17? Okay. So CN4D is upgrade sidewalks along Prince Street and where they are necessary for completing pedestrian connections along Santa Fe Drive.
Can somebody define for me upgrade? To what standards? Where?
Typically, we have along arterials, we have a 5-foot detached sidewalk standard. So if you look at the new McDonald's, for example, that's what's being proposed there. Just so you have a little separation from the street. CDOT has its own requirements in terms of how you can landscape and what you can do, but we would typically look at a 5-foot detached. So, and we have that in some locations along Santa Fe.
So would it be fair to say upgrade sidewalks to arterial standards, or?
Well, that would apply to Santa Fe, but not Prince.
Yeah, I don't think I'd go that far. I think upgrade to me means make better. I think it's a general statement. I think that's good.
Yeah,
Right, it's all relative. And that's
Right. You've got detached sidewalks along part of Prince. You've got sidewalks extending from the curb line back to the building front and other parts. So my point is, do we have a standard? Can we reference a standard or develop a standard? Or are we just going to say improve or upgrade, which means whatever you want it to mean?
We don't really need to. I mean, that Public Services does that. That's their jurisdiction. But I think the encouragement that those streets are important to you is kind of what they're looking for. Prince Street, as you know, if you're walking up and down, particularly on the east side, it gets down to a 3.5 foot sidewalk with a lot of heavy traffic between Powers, particularly to the north, because of the restaurants and the county courthouse, and a lot of women walking back and forth in terms of the women's center that's to the north. So we get a lot of pedestrian traffic in there, as well as people going to lunch.
Yeah,
so 3 feet is a little narrow in there. So that's what we're talking about primarily, is meeting current city standards.
And you'll recall we talked about the complete streets policy at the last meeting, and that addresses that. It's really on a case by case. I mean, I don't think in the vision plan here, in the comp plan, that we can state a standard.
Right. It includes handicap ramps, includes all that stuff. I think just depending on what the standard is and what the location is. But you're right.
So can we vote on this particular policy? All those in favor of this policy, raise your hand. Dave's against?
David.
Okay, that's CN4D. CN4E is improved connections from the light rail station to Main Street and ACC.
Ow.
Very good question.
And we had a lot of discussion on potential ways to improve that connection.
Yeah, I think one of the things we heard in the public meetings was the connection, particularly from the light rail station to Main Street, was originally designed with the south stairwell. So you came to the top of the south stairwell, and there's a map, and the sidewalk leads you directly to the sidewalk that connects over to Alamo and then to the park and through. If you come up the newer north stairway, you get to the top, and it's not quite as clear where you go. So part of it's signage, part of it's just direction. And then part of it, I think, as you go south is also there's the pedestrian connections and, again, the width of the sidewalks, but just kind of constantly looking at that. Again, it's setting priorities for public services in terms of what kind of improvements you're looking for.
Can we have a vote on this one? Who all agrees with CN4E?
How are we going to improve a connection to Main Street 1 block away?
It's part of the implementation strategy.
And I think we made some major improvements already. Initially, when you came up that north stairway from the light rail station, you end up in the middle of the parking lot. 2 years ago, because we saw it as a priority, what we talked about was we added additional sidewalk that went actually out to Alamo Street, went through what used to be landscaping. And I don't know if you walked up that much, but for a long time, there were people who, because they were heading to the courthouse or to the east or the School for the Blind, would walk through the landscaping. So just putting in a sidewalk, putting in the fences that RTD worked with us to do has made a huge improvement in that section. Now the dilemma is you get out there and suddenly there's no pedestrian crossing, but everybody's crossing there. So it's a question, I think, for public services in terms of do we change the crosswalk? How's that actually work? But right now, if you cross there, you're walking through the grass, and now there's a big rut because so many people use that as an access. So it's that kind of question, I think, in terms of that's a major connection. So,
And if you could imagine the parking lot there redeveloping at some point in the future, this would be something that developer would be responsible
The
for.
parking lot that's already less than half of needed capacity is going to redevelop?
Absolutely. I think that's in
very
RTD's
possible.
plans long term, and they're starting to talk about in other locations, and I don't think that we're off that list. That you provide parking other places in the meantime, you come back and you structure parking when the demand's there. We've been in place for 10 years. So eventually we will be talking about something like that. At that point, as Craig said, sometimes the land uses along it provide that best connection. You want to draw people along and say, here's how you go, just so they know where to go, and it's interesting, and it's a good connection, feels short.
So we voted on CN4E, Dave was against, and Dave, I just took a note on, how do you improve connections and to make sure we address it in the implementation strategies. So that brings us to CN4F, use landscaping, bollards, if I'm pronouncing that right, or on-street parking to separate sidewalks from moving cars.
I had a concern with the way that was written.
Okay.
That seems a little too prescriptive. I just said, where possible, use landscaping or on-street parking to separate sidewalks from moving cars. I mean, it's a very simple change, but bollards, I don't know that are, but that's really
In front of the town hall there.
Oh, yeah.
So when we go to improve the connection on the south side of the bridge from Alamo to Milton Boulevard, which of those is going to work there?
Well, this isn't the connection as much as the sidewalks. Yeah, probably in this case, you widen the sidewalk is kind of what you end up doing. So you're right. I mean, there may be other options.
So Craig has proposed suggested language. Can you repeat that?
Where possible, use landscaping or on-street parking to separate sidewalks from moving cars.
Any comments on that? Should we go ahead and vote on that?
Presumably, the bollards are there for safety. That's one of the thoughts of that. And safety, I thought, was one of our more important criteria on a connection network. If we were talking about sidewalks along a bridge, one of the things that came up in the early discussion was cars going by and throwing up snow, water, whatever, on pedestrians or bicyclists. We had that same discussion when we talked about the sidewalks along Bowles about a year ago with Denver Water's property. So we could also, in addition to the bollards, we could also be considering things like splash barriers or that sort of thing. But to just say landscaping.
I'd say or other mechanisms, sure. Yeah.
Or physical structures or something. I mean, you don't have to be as prescriptive. I think, Craig, that's what you were trying to avoid. But I just want to open the door so that nobody fixates and decides, oh, we have to widen the sidewalk, and that location, that means adding a sidewalk, a new bridge, another $300,000, and that sort of thing, which is where Charlie comes in and says, we can't afford it.
So Craig, do you agree to add the other mechanisms to the language?
Sure, yeah, that's fine.
So should we go ahead and vote on the language change? Jenny?
Yeah, I think taking out the bollards and using other mechanisms, I think, would be helpful. A lot of times bollards aren't designed very well. So
You can say the same thing about landscaping for that matter.
but other mechanism, I think, might give us more opportunity to. It could be a structure. It could be.
You could say bollards or other structures.
So who all agrees with Craig's language?
With the addition of...
With the addition of the...
Yeah, I've got it reading currently, where possible, use landscaping, on-street parking, and other mechanisms to separate sidewalks from moving cars.
Okay. Everybody agreed with that except Dave?
No, David agrees.
Oh, okay, that was unanimous. And CN4G, continue to provide safe and comfortable street crossing. I deleted that in my notes. I'm sorry, Craig.
What I added to it was at all intersections. I didn't think, the way I read it, it could be anywhere.
And it could be, if you've got a long block.
So all those in favor of adding at all intersections and approving the policy, raise your hand.
How is that different from the policy?
The policy before?
No, the CN4. Pedestrian bicycle connections should be comfortable, so we're going to provide them. I guess I'm still trying to figure out what comfortable means and to whom.
And we got rid of comfortable.
Change it to
Safe. Sorry.
Safe, efficient, and inviting.
Where did they? Look.
Can we read back the way it's reading right now? 'Cause
Yeah,
I
I've got
think
continue to provide safe and comfortable street crossings at all intersections.
previous, so comfortable still is using a previous edition.
Do we want to?
Oh, we left it out of the
We left it out of the-
policy. Oh, right. It's on page 16 on the one I found.
So do we want to delete comfortable? Give David a few seconds to get oriented here. So what's on the table is, do we want to delete comfortable out of CN4G? All those in favor of deleting comfortable? So we have 3 out of, that motion fails? Oh, wait, 4? That carries. With Craig
Is that
and
the only change,
Craig
you're
and
just taking
Kurt.
comfortable out?
We're adding at all intersections.
At all intersections.
All
That was the other
intersections
proposal, yeah.
in the downtown area? All intersections.
Right. So now it's continue to provide safe street crossings at all intersections. Kurt, you,
Start cribbing off of
I think you're talking about, I mean, all intersections means every intersection. Everything along Alamo, we're gonna, every one of those intersections, you're going to put a crosswalk in there?
No, I don't know that it necessarily means crosswalk. I didn't think of it that way, although if it is implied, I think we need to discuss that.
I'm thinking that's implied when you say, provide safe at all intersections.
I mean, really, under state law, I think it's, a pedestrian has right-of-way at any intersection, correct?
Right.
Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. So I understand it from Littleton Police. The way Colorado law reads, if there's a break in traffic, once there's a break in traffic and you step out, then you've got the right-of-way. If there's no break in traffic and you step out, you don't have the right-of-way. The cars do. So you have to wait for that break and then step. So
I know it's not appropriate to provide crosswalks at unsignalized intersections.
I mean, that's the way I was reading it. You're going to put a crosswalk. That's going to make it safe. You're going to put a crosswalk at every intersection along Alamo, which is fine if that's what you want to do. I think it's going to slow the traffic down. Maybe okay.
That's not the intent, I don't think. Although Main Street has that now.
Main Street I think is different than Alamo.
So if we took out at all
And are you
intersections?
talking about the entire, every street going north? On Prince? And every intersection at Powers?
Are you suggesting at every intersection with a light or a stop sign? I mean, that, to me, that's just a slight variation that makes it make more sense.
All controlled intersections, or?
I would feel more comfortable.
I mean,
with that.
in general, I think that the placement of crosswalks is really left to the Public Works Department and the traffic engineer. That has to be done pursuant to a study, and they don't put crosswalks where it would lead pedestrians to have a false sense of security. They look at the number of cars that go by, they look at the speeds and that sort of thing. So in general, public services, we wouldn't advise them to put up a crosswalk, a traffic signal, anything like that until after the traffic engineer had studied it. So if you wanted to say, study the possibility of putting crosswalks at these intersections, I think that would be fine, but to actually try to put into a comp plan where you believe traffic signals and that sort of thing should be, I think would be beyond the scope.
Or we could delete it altogether.
Because public
Can I
utilities is
suggest a
doing
change
that
in
anyway.
language?
Of course.
Okay. Because I think there's one thing that's missing here, and maybe it's somewhere else that I missed it, but that's accessible. Would they be accessible per ADA? And what I'm suggesting is that continue to provide safe and accessible crossings at appropriate intersections.
Suzanne, can the city do anything on a street without providing ADA accessibility at an intersection and a crossing?
Well, the ADA only kicks in when you do a change.
Right.
So there could be areas where we haven't done it.
Right, no, that's not what I'm asking.
Right.
If we change anything,
Right. Then we'd have
can we
to,
avoid doing that?
no, then
No.
we have to come into ADA compliance. But if there are areas where we're not in compliance, but we're not planning on doing any new curb cuts or something like that, I suppose it would be within our, the policy or within your purview to say that you believe those intersections should be upgraded regardless of.
So, Craig, can you repeat your language again?
Continue to provide safe and accessible crossings at appropriate intersections.
How many people agree with that language and deleting the existing CN4G and replacing it with Craig's language? 1, 2, 3, 4 with Kurt and Dave against. So that carries. Okay, so that brings us to CN5. While not allowing parking to diminish its overall design quality, downtown should have parking for residents, employees, shoppers, and visitors. My comment on that was, you really didn't need while not allowing parking to diminish its overall design quality, and just say downtown should have parking for residents, employees, shoppers, and visitors.
We can talk a little bit about why we stuck it in there. We were trying to make a fairly general statement in terms of we really want to have parking, but at the same time, parking can overtake if you're not careful. And so it can really kind of diminish the whole experience. And certainly when we're looking for something in downtown and along Main Street in our historic downtown, you have to be pretty careful how you place it and how you design it. So that was the sense of, yes, we want parking, but we don't want something that's going to be just a huge parking field or on Main Street or whatever it might be. That so that placement, size, and design is pretty critical generally. So that's we're certainly open to whatever the language might be. That was the intent.
What do you guys think of the statement as written?
I think it's a judgment call. It doesn't say anything. But that's okay. We're doing that with every other statement we make, so it doesn't matter.
All those who are in favor of CN5, raise your hand. That is seeing everyone. Now going to implementation strategy CN5A. Develop a parking program for downtown that, 1, evaluates parking options that responds to the needs of residents, property owners, merchants, and visitors. And 2, determines the best option and includes an implementation program for achieving that option. And 3, provides an equitable regulatory and financing structure which could include 1, the hierarchy of parking requirements that help implement the vision, goals, and policies of this plan, and 2, funding programs such as fees in lieu of providing on-site parking, and 4, includes a physical plan that incorporates parking into the built environment in such a way that it does not disrupt the quality of downtown. That's a lot there.
I have just one comment on parking, and I know we've talked a bit of in general within our group, but one of the things that I think would be helpful is in our zoning to address a reduction for our downtown area for businesses, given the realities of our site constraints. And that, so I would propose to have a parking reduction table for downtown businesses. And I'm not sure if...
It's kind of what's implied, we were thinking about with 3I, but I like your language. I think it's a lot clearer, so, yeah.
And that would give credit for things as far as being within a certain distance of light rail or bus stop or...
Could be size, if, Steve's concerned about the size of structures. Sometimes, you could talk about that as something too. If you do something larger, you end up having to provide more. So you can think about whatever your goals are and how you want to achieve that and establish that.
And also there's, for parking too, as far as what's local draw for like a business, that's not as significant, but yet when you have a regional business that comes in, that really has more of an impact. And so also potentially looking at that as part of the parking reduction table.
So do you propose to add this as an implementation strategy or incorporate
Part
it
of the
into
implementation
3?
strategy. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure what all the details would be, but having a parking reduction table in the zoning would be very helpful. As far as for any project dealing with parking, the 2 things I look at in the zoning code the most for doing a project is the parking and the height. I mean, referencing that closely. So the parking and the zoning is really key, and if it's not in your zoning, then it doesn't have the weight.
So, I'm sorry.
Also, historic preservation, we'd like to see something in here about an incentive that could be on this table for the existing structures in there that do not have adequate parking as it is. So that's one of the incentives to being in the district right now is parking incentives. So some sort of continuation or some plan. I see an implementation plan, but I don't see a lot of specifics here, so it concerns us on this side of things. So if you're going to do a parking table or something like a reduction table, we'd like to see, that incentive somewhere be still in that reduction table.
Would that be the existing, right now, the 50% reduction, or is it something?
Something along those lines. I mean, we were working in the design guidelines, but you need something in there. I mean, you can't, those existing structures do not have parking as it is now.
So could we say something like create a parking table? Not necessarily addressing reduction, but, I mean, it would address reduction, but it also would address the, concerns of historical preservation too. Would that work?
And I would say put something in there that in zoning, in our zoning, that's where it needs to go, to have some weight to it.
So somehow zoning is going to predetermine what business has more of a regional than a community or a neighborhood attraction, or to what degree we should be able to lower or increase parking. And if we give a reduction for a business that's close to a bus stop and RTD moves the bus stop, they lose their exemption and they have to provide more parking. And if it's a large development on a site, multiple lots along Alamo, what we measure the distance to RTD from the nearest point, from the center point. You can micromanage this all you want.
Well,
But
maybe
in the end, instead of simplifying and making development rules more clear for people, we're creating a rat's nest of complex checkerboarding requirements that's going to drive a developer right out the window, or better yet, to Centennial or to Inglewood or someplace else.
But I think if we
Actually, I think it would be helpful.
I think if we
Because of the
clarify
current parking requirements are based on the suburbs, and so now you're looking at suburbs.
I'm not
so-
arguing about changing what we have. We all know that has to change. There's a difference between recognizing we're not a suburban development and saying we're going to make a separate set of rules overlapping in a network, a matrix for every site and every condition, historic or close to a bus stop or close to RTD. You're not going to get that into zoning. City council's going to laugh at us. Ain't going to happen.
Well, and we do say we want to develop a parking program for downtown that, so maybe if we added something like create a parking table and address potential zoning changes, does that address what you're thinking?
Referring again.
Because we are going to have a separate discussion on parking, and
Consistently, we're not doing a plan. We're saying somebody ought to do a plan. We're doing this on virtually every item that comes up. I don't know where we went wrong, but go ahead, forget it. Thanks.
Okay.
Yeah, I tend to support the idea of having some sort of parking reduction table that's an outcome of a study. The way I read this is we're saying do a parking study. And we're not, I don't think, equipped here at Planning Commission to determine how many spaces should be for each property on Main Street or whatever, but somebody out there is and should be able to put, and this is not unusual. There's many urban areas in the Denver metro area that are doing the same thing. So I think developers are looking for that type of guidance, and it makes sense. So I would support that.
So language that we have on the table, do you agree with that language, or do you want to propose something different?
Parking reduction table, just keep it simple.
And do you want to include and address potential zoning changes, or identify potential zoning changes? Does that, no, yes?
I think the point is that when that table is developed, that it be accommodated or addressed in the zoning, in an update to the zoning classification.
So it's implied?
Yeah.
Okay, so,
But we're providing no criteria for that. You know, when you delegate a task to staff without any criteria or guidelines, that's not delegating, that's deferring. We've got to break this habit.
Well, this won't be staff, though. I mean, this is going to be a public process, and Planning Commission, City Council both want to be involved in parking plan, as well as the neighbors and property owners.
I think reduction is a criteria. I mean, it's a criteria, and there probably should be more, I agree, but.
so now here's, so can we vote on the language there to create a parking reduction table, and then the next vote would be where to put it in this sequence? So how many in favor of creating a parking reduction table? And we have Dave and Kurt against. And then now is the question, do we put it in 3? Where do you guys think is appropriate?
3I seems to be the right place. Create a new.
Okay, so all those in favor of moving that to 3I? That is Kurt and Dave against. And now if we can go back to CN 5A and, excuse me, 5A, develop a parking program for downtown that, do we agree in concept to develop a parking program? Yes, let's vote on that. Seeing everyone. Okay, how about number 1? Evaluates parking options that respond to the needs of residents, property owners, merchants, and visitors.
You know, I could see where we might entertain the notion of describing how different parking options might effectively respond to it. But evaluating them? Okay, never mind, doesn't matter.
Instead of evaluate, Is there another word that we could use?
Obviously, we want to avoid anything concrete, so, leave the general language.
But provides might be a better word than evaluates.
Provides parking options.
Well, no, in that sense, I'd rather stick with evaluates, because we're not really talking about providing them. Unless we're talking about, the only one we could be talking about would be public options.
So how many people support it as written? That's, did you raise your hand?
No.
So Matt and Dave against. And so number 2 determines the best option and includes an implementation program for achieving that option.
I guess my question for number 2 and number 3, these are under the same develop a parking program for downtown that number 2 determines the best option. What if we determine the best option is to not have the city do it, but just have it be marketplace driven? And then number 3, then we're requiring that it provide equitable regulatory financing structure, which could include all those other options in there. We're prescribing that they do that, but what if they find the best option isn't to do that? What do we do? That it gets written in here that they go down that road.
You do say which could include, so it may give you a little wiggle room, but you may want more.
But number 2 and number 3 have, if you vote on them, they have to be in there. So the number 2 says you find the best option. Number 3 says no matter what the best option was, you provide an equitable regulatory financing structure, which could include. I'm thinking they're.
Well, I guess my thought would be, I guess you may not agree with this, but if you decided just to leave it to the market, that the equitable regulatory and financing structure would be just to leave it to the private market, I think, because it probably would be the solution. Would be.
So,
So,
that may
yeah.
be. If that's the way they interpret
Yeah.
it. I'm thinking they're in conflict.
Are we looking for a single best option for all situations throughout the downtown area? Really?
Well, and
Because that's what this says.
And I personally think we're going to have to identify the various options, and it may or may not be up to us to identify the best option. We're identifying the options for other bodies to select.
Yeah, I would guess that it's probably going to be a set of options, depending on if you're in the residential area.
And that's what I'd like to see us reference, is options appropriate to different conditions.
What about deleting number 2? Would that,
Well, that's all about implementing what's determined by the plan. So in that sense, I think it's worth keeping. But I agree that there's probably more than one option there, and maybe it's just making those plural, determine the best options and include implementation programs for achieving those options.
I could see if we said that, better determines the best options for meeting localized needs or something, but
so what about voting on determines the best options and includes an implementation program for achieving those options? Does that work? So all those in favor of that?
Okay.
Seeing everyone? So number 3. What about what do you guys think?
could we change it to provides equitable regulatory or financing structures, which could include?
All those agree with that? Raise your hands. Seeing no one against. How about 1? And that would include create a parking reduction table. All those in favor of that, number 1? And Matt and Dave are against. And how about number 2, funding programs such as fees and providing on-street parking?
Should there be a comma in there? Fees in lieu of comma, providing on-street parking?
I think hyphens, maybe.
You need a hyphen between lieu and of to be considered, or well, I don't know.
Fees in lieu.
Fees in lieu of, all hyphenated. But I agree with Craig, a comma after that would add some clarity. It's not in lieu of providing.
So can we just say funding program?
No, it is, the
Oh, I see
intent
what
was,
you're saying, yeah.
the intent was to have it fees in lieu of providing on-site parking. So either, currently you have to provide on-site
gotcha.
parking,
Yeah,
and
I
the
was
discussion
reading
we've
that.
had
I
is,
see.
there should be an alternative for people who have small lots, like
Okay.
Steve was talking about.
Yeah, that makes
And so you could provide fees instead. So I guess we don't want the hyphens in there,
Right.
actually, I was wrong.
Okay.
I was reading that.
My only problem with that is, when you start collecting fees in lieu, and you don't provide guidelines for how it's going to be used and when it's going to be used, we could end up with the same kind of brouhaha we had over the taxes collected for the water project 9 years ago, Dennis? 8? We don't want to do that. So if we're going to do this, then we need to include with that fees in lieu of some kind of intent on what it's going to be used for and on what kind of a timeline.
Can we just say funding programs instead of identifying, so we've got more options?
The reason we stuck that in there just because I think you had talked about it, so as an example. So you could either leave it out or put it in.
As an example, it's fine. It's plain that we're saying such as, not that's the only thing we're talking about. I'm just saying if we're going to you start talking about fees in lieu, and the first thing that somebody being asked to pay the fee is going to ask is, what's it going to be used for? When am I going to benefit from it? If it's not going to be used for 10 years down the road, and by that time 50% of new businesses fail, why should I pay the fee? It isn't going to benefit me at all.
But it does say above that it could include, so it's not prescriptive. It's that those are
I'm just saying, one of the things we're saying it could include is a fee in lieu of program. And I'm saying if we're going to specify that that's a possibility, then we also ought to also indicate that for a stated purpose within a stated timeline or condition or set of conditions. Once, I don't know, whatever, either 3 years, 5 years, when parking becomes a problem, something. But give somebody some expectation, if they're going to be asked to pay the fee, what they're going to get from it and when. Or what's going to determine what they're going to get from it and when. Otherwise, it's just open-ended. It's just, write us a check.
Can you clarify for me who would pay this fee? Is this the business owner that isn't providing enough parking?
Yes. Typically, where we assess parking right now is with expansions, new development. So the tavern, for example, had to provide parking. They were part of a larger development which already had accommodated that. So it's when you get a certain size expansion or a new development that you see it. Whereas existing uses and existing structures typically don't have to.
But I think
So following what Mr. Metcalf was saying is, what would those be used for? Would they be used to invest in providing other parking? Like, why would they pay it if it wasn't going to be purposed for that?
Yeah, the programs I've seen do that. They set up a specific program, and you get fairly detailed, and I think that's what this would be talking about. If you talk about a program for that, you'd want to know, have answers to those questions, I think. You might even look at specific sites. You might even start targeting, here's what we're going to acquire, and here's what we're going to do it. And it gets typically just into capital costs, doesn't get into operational. So.
Well, and I personally think we're going to have to discuss all this when the parking agenda item comes back to us. And we're going to have to identify various types of programs that we can use. And, it'll be far more concrete at a later point. This is just what we have in our plan for this moment. So, Kurt, you seem...
I think it all makes sense when we say it could include. Doesn't have to.
But if it does, if it
Well,
could...
I agree with you. You have to have a date certain. This is going to be built. When you start collecting fees from people, you say in 3 years we're going to have a parking structure.
I mean, you could easily say funding programs such as fees in lieu of providing on-site parking with stated purpose and timelines. Put it in parentheses or something. You're just making sure that somewhere down the road, somebody knows if they start collecting fees, or somebody knows if the city comes to collect fees from them as a new business or developer, there is a finite end product to come from that.
So all those that would favor adding that with the stated purpose and timelines, adding it with stated purpose and timelines to that, and then we'll vote on all those in favor of that, adding that?
Adding.
Okay, and then all those in favor of that language, funding programs such as fees in providing on-street parking and,
With a stated purpose and timeline.
right, all those in favor of that? Unanimous? So that gets us to the end of circulation network. I just wanted to point out a couple of things that I heard from.
Did we do?
What did we do with
I'm sorry,
four?
Yeah, four.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. And, yeah.
Includes a physical plan that incorporates parking into the built environment in such a way that it does not disrupt the quality of downtown.
Physical plan as in we're going to pre-select sites where something like that could go in? I'm sure the owners of those sites would be happy to hear that. Or are we talking about some kind of design guidelines or selection guidelines?
It's up to you, but generally it would be that, yeah, because you don't want to notify. Yeah.
Right.
You don't want to pick somebody's
Right.
part without letting them know.
Well, unless you pick my lot.
Negotiating a little bit, right, exactly. Yeah.
So could we substitute includes selection guidelines instead of a physical plan?
Selection guidelines or design guidelines or?
No, not design.
Selection?
Selection. Well, I don't know.
I tend to think guidelines is actually more specific than a plan. It may not need to be a physical plan, but some sort of a master plan or something.
So you would propose saying includes guidelines that incorporate parking?
No, I'm suggesting we don't. I like plan better than guidelines.
But dropping physical perhaps, yeah, so just includes a plan.
So,
When somebody says plan, I envision a map or a drawing. Is that what you have in mind?
Not necessarily. A plan to me would be, yeah, it would include a physical plan, but it's normally.
I think that's what we need to avoid is including any kind of physical plan, saying this is where it ought to go. You just drove the price of that guy's lot up, which I'm sure will make him happy.
so would you agree with getting rid of physical and just have it straight as plan?
I still believe guidelines is better than a plan.
Well, then let's vote on who agrees that guidelines would be better than just saying plans. Kurt and Dave, and the motion fails. So then what about deleting physical? All those in favor of deleting physical? So 5, seeing Kurt against, so we'll revise that to say include a plan that incorporates parking into the built environment, et cetera, et cetera. So any more comments on that before we vote?
Yeah, just been involved with some parking plans, but not guidelines are, I think, tough to do with parking plans.
Guidelines such as they should be off the street, not, when we've talked about this and we've gone through this and it's in the design standards and guidelines, nothing new there. Those are guidelines. Height limitations, we have those already worked in. Those are guidelines. But a plan is saying it should go here or here or that, and we don't want to do that.
So all those in favor of 4 with deleting physical to number 4, raise your hand. And we have Kurt and Dave against. We need to divert,
I can switch sides.
One side. Okay, so then that, I just have a couple of comments that I heard on the February 28th meeting that I wanted to bring up. And
If you don't mind, before we do that, if you don't mind, Steve had mentioned an incentive for existing structures and his historic district. Do you feel there's enough language in here, Steve, that addresses that? You still
No.
feel, okay?
I mean, I think basically all you have to do is say, where it says on number 2, funding programs such as fees, you could say, I mean, it's just programs such as fees or incentives in lieu of providing on-site parking. That gets funding out of there, and then you could put fees or incentives, and then you could add the language that David added in there, but I don't. Incentives is also something, you guys have just talked about funding, so there's other programs besides just funding or fees. Right now, there's an incentive program in there, in lieu of fees, but, I think you need to keep it more open-ended until you get to, and I agree with David, guidelines when you get to parking versus a plan. Unless you're gonna go back and set it up to your framework up there, and the plan goes to different styles of parking or options of parking back to your framework.
So incentive programs, and then throw in the concept of historic designation reductions as well as the other?
It could be that, or, you know, how the tavern, I mean, there's different incentives. I don't think we have to explain exactly what that is right now, but if you put in incentives right now, we can get more of the detail, and like you're doing with the fees, then we could add in historic structures or something like that. Because there's already a lot of property owners that have incentives for their historic structures, so if you take out that, you know, that item, and I know that'll come up in the big parking discussion.
And actually changing that from funding programs to incentive programs not only picks up what's going on currently with historic designation, it also ties in with what Jenny's proposing with the reduction matrix on proximity to RTD and that sort of thing. So
Well, and one of the
those are all incentives.
They're all incentives.
The matrix is just a way of specifying it. Whether I like the detailed idea or not, at least that kind of wording change here brings all that into one place.
Gives you more flexibility down the road.
So,
I added funding programs such as fee in lieu and incentives of providing parking.
okay,
Or add this notion of the incentives to
so to
3.2.
So to 3.2, funding programs such as fee in lieu and incentives of providing on-site parking, would that work?
I think for clarity, my thought is you might want to say incentives or funding programs, because as fees and lieu of providing on-street parking has to be attached to the funding programs. So if you put incentives or, then I think you've got them separate. So,
Actually,
I'm just saying, get
they're all
rid of
incentives.
the
I mean,
fees. Yeah. I'm just
Whether
saying-
whether it's forgetting historic designation and cutting it, what is it, currently in half now? 50%. Okay, or reductions according to distance from, proximity to, or providing bicycle right parking, that sort of thing, or the fees in lieu of, which is a reduction, an incentive to reduce the amount of space set aside for parking on site. It's incentives. Across the board, they're incentives, whether it's a reduction or fees in lieu in order to get the reduction.
Well, and we have the reduction in 3.1, so in 3.2, we're just adding incentives or funding programs.
Well, that says we're going to provide a parking reduction table, okay? What this says is it's collecting all the reasons, all the ways you can get those incentives, whatever.
So,
I guess my only thought is before you have incentives, you have to have something you're incenting against.
Well, that's
So
already in
you're going
zoning.
to have some kind of funding. I mean, you're going to have some
No, the
requirement
fees in
for
lieu is the
providing
incentive.
parking.
I mean, we already have the requirements, they're in zoning.
But do you want to keep them? I mean, that's a big question. You're going to look at the program. Do you want to keep requirements or get rid of them completely? And if you keep them, do you have ways to incent, so you don't have to pay them? There's a whole question, I think. So I think you have to have something that here talks about some kind of mechanism for requiring parking.
well, and we do say with 3, provide an equitable regulatory or financing structure. Do we even need the 3.2?
Or take the parking table, reduction table, and take it out of, 3.1 and put it into 3.2 and combine those.
I don't know that it matters where it is. You could reverse them, I guess.
And I'm agreeing with David. I mean, incentives are incentives, I think if you get rid of such as fees, you could say incentives or funding programs in lieu of providing on-street parking, then you don't get into the fee discussion you had, what are you collecting, where is it going, and all that stuff.
What about adding incentives or funding programs to provide on-site parking?
Jenny, what kind of reductions do you have in mind? I mean, the ones we were talking about months ago, as far as, and the ones you mentioned briefly tonight, they're basically transit related.
They're transit related.
Or alternative transit related.
The big is basically saying people can take alternate modes of transportation, that they should be given some kind of credit for that they're in downtown, and that people are going to park in one spot and walk to multiple businesses. And I also like how, David, you mentioned about with the mall kind of analogy of that the city does provide a certain block amount of parking so that businesses may come and go, but there still is the block parking that everyone can use. So someone doesn't have to always provide parking for just their own business needs. So
One of the reductions I've seen, Cherry Creek North, for example, had a goal 35 years ago that they wanted to have smaller businesses, smaller sites. They didn't want to be filled up with Toys R Us and the big box stuff. They wanted to keep the mom and pop to the extent they could. So they've kept the scale. They haven't kept the mom and pop, but they kept the scale. And the way they did that was, the smaller the site, they realized that if you have a small site, you probably can't provide on-site parking. So they gave an incentive for that. Larger sites, you had to provide more parking, and it was structured. It was a whole hierarchy of how many parking spaces you have to provide. That work, they also wanted to have residential, so they started saying, okay, we're going to start reducing what we require for residential because we think that's a way to get more residential. And the reality is we're probably going to provide parking anyway for that. And then they also decided they wanted to be able to have changing uses because you have a parking requirement for office, you have a parking requirement for retail. And they thought a lot of our space is going to be interchangeable. It's a real mixed-use neighborhood. And so they provided the same parking requirement. So they really structured their parking requirements based on what their goals were. And that's what we're talking about for downtown and Main Street both, is that you can look at what your goals are and say, okay, part of it's historic preservation, but you've got a lot of other goals other than historic preservation. You've got goals in terms of the scale. You've got goals in terms of what kind of uses you want. So you want to look at a program that's going to do all of those things. And that's what I think there's some options for you.
How about if we tried this, just as a proposed language change on 3.2? We changed it to incentive programs such as reductions for historic designation or transit-related advantages or fees in lieu of required on-site parking.
All those in favor?
Did you get it? I didn't get it.
I didn't get it.
Sorry.
Well, vote on it, and then we'll decide whether you need to get it.
Oh, that'd be good.
Yeah.
I'm crossing off a lot here.
Well, look, did everybody hear it? Can we vote on it, and then so they know whether to write it down or not?
That'd be good.
So should we go ahead and vote? Okay. So Matt, you're against?
Okay.
What did it say?
Incentive programs such as reductions for historic designation or transit-related advantages or fees in lieu of required on-site parking.
Everybody still agree?
Having heard it again?
So, that's it? We're done with circulation network? I just wanted to bring up a couple of points that was mentioned on February 28th, and I just wanted to see if you guys agreed that we addressed all of those points in what we changed. Both Dick Farley and Craig, you mentioned Rio Grande is important for vehicular and bike access, and I don't know if we adequately addressed that. And then, Jenny, you wanted to elevate the bicycle master plan and mention bike sharing. We significantly addressed that at the last meeting, so do you think we addressed it adequately? Or do you want to?
do we actually use, I'm trying to think, bike sharing? So I think it could be something good. I mean, I guess in the bike master plan, that's something that they're going to be looking at is options, but it could be something that I know they're already doing it in Denver, but not, I mean, I think it'd be something to look into.
Well, and that could be a recommendation from the pedestrian bicycle master plan, too, to include that.
Question is whether we should put it in the comp plan as a goal.
What do you guys think? Do we need to include bike sharing as a goal or policy? Probably policy at this point.
If we include it at all, why don't we vote on that?
Jenny?
Or would it be part of an implementation that it's part of, something that's part of an implementation?
So like CN2A, implement the pedestrian and bicycle master plan. Maybe CN2B,
Well, although when you get, there's a whole bunch of things that could go under CN2A. I wonder how much we want to put in there. I know I mentioned it as just a comment when I went to the pedestrian bicycle
Wasn't that one of the
master
things they
plan.
were talking about at the open house? So, unless we want to start listing everything that
Right,
may
that's-
come.
yeah, so,
yeah. So we're okay to just leave everything the way it is and just move forward?
Although, if I might note, unless my memory fails me, the timeline they were showing for the pedestrian and bicycle master plan doesn't have them completing that until after we hope to have issued the downtown plan. So, as I feared 2 weeks ago, we're going to be, currently we're heading toward recommending implementing a plan we haven't seen yet. Just as a note.
Okay, and Craig, you mentioned adding a reference to developing a hierarchy of street and lighting types. I
I
don't know.
want to revisit the bicycling along Rio Grande. I assume that would be an outcome of the bicycle and pedestrian master plan. I think it's a good goal because it connects Lexan to the light rail and to Main Street. I know there's a lot of limitations in the right-of-way on Rio Grande, so I'm a little hesitant to prescribe it as a policy.
Don't tell Charlie, having just completed that
Right.
renovation.
So I would probably defer that to the bicycle ed plan. And then as far as the lighting, is that going to circulation network? Or is that
I don't
separate?
think so. We did it as an implementation, LU 12A,
And I thought we had
policy
covered
LU
that.
12.
Okay, so you're good with that.
Yeah.
And then, do we adequately address missing wayfinding and signage? And I swear, I don't have any other comments on any of the other subjects in that meeting.
That's on Amanda's, are you 9B?
That's good.
Okay. So are we okay now to move to economic development? And I'll try to start talking faster.
We have-
The goal is downtown will be an important economic generator through public-private cooperation, business retention and expansion, and being the center of government services and higher education. Comments on the goal? Anybody not like the goal?
I could live with being an important city or center of government services and higher education. These a little presumptuous.
So you would propose changing being a center of government services and higher education?
Instead of being the.
Yeah. I had the same comment.
Sorry, I'm just remembering the last time Arapahoe County decided they needed to have a change in venue. The other thing, oh God. We've talked about this over the last 2 years since we had to deal with the differing viewpoints we got from the public outreach about is it going to be neighborhood, is it going to be community, is it going to be regional, whatever. What we essentially decided is we need elements of all that. And that rather than let it slide toward one or the other, I think we need to recognize that it's important that we remain a local, regional, and tourist destination. Or wording to that effect.
Would the policy ED1 work as,
Well, no, what we're saying is downtown's going to be an important economic generator through, and one of the ways we're going to do it is being more than just a regional destination, more than just a community destination, more than just a tourist destination. We need balance in all of those, or we're not going to work. It's just not going to work. And that came through fairly clearly from most of our public outreach.
so could we add through balancing at the very end of the very first sentence, downtown will be an important economic generator through balancing public-private cooperation? Would that work?
Just add it as another bullet. We're saying it's going to be an important economic generator through, and we list the things that are going to be necessary for it to remain an important economic generator.
Do you want to propose some language for that?
Yeah, I would make it the third bullet, insert it in between business retention and expansion and the government services and higher education, saying remaining an attractive local, regional, and tourist destination.
Okay, how many people?
I just have one, and maybe it's just me, I just have a little trouble understanding what an important economic generator is.
Well, probably getting back to our early on fight about, well, downtown isn't the only economic generator in the city. Remember our discussion about, is it the heart of the city, or no, it's just well. But nevertheless, it is an important economic generator. If you don't have downtown, you could take out any of the shopping centers. Owners of the shopping centers, close your ears for the next 60 seconds. You could take out any shopping center along Broadway, or Littleton Boulevard, or Mineral, even Aspen Grove. And yeah, there'd be an economic pain, but nothing compared to taking out downtown. Without downtown and the activity that goes on there of all sorts, cultural, community, economic, whatever, there is no Littleton.
I agree with that, and I don't think that's my question. My question is the economic generator. To me, the language just seems a little weird. Like I would think of it as center of economic vitality, or something, like a place that, and maybe it's just, it's language or wordsmithing.
I think that's fairly typical economic development language, talking about generating jobs, tax revenues, that kind of stuff to make the engine run. That's where that comes from.
It also alludes to what we've been trying to say in a lot of the other policies and goals we've set up, that you need not just retail businesses or restaurants or that sort of thing. You need the offices, the service businesses, and everything that generate the traffic that goes into those restaurants, that has some spillover in shopping for localized needs in the other shops that are around there. You have residences around there that bring in the same traffic. It's the matrix of all those uses that's important, of all those activities. It isn't just one or two, and that's why I'm saying we really need to get something in here to remind ourselves, look, you need this mix. It can't focus on or concentrate on just tourism. Historic downtown Littleton, it's a tourist center. Well, it's got to be more than that. So that's what I was trying to accomplish with that.
So, Dave, your language was to remain an attractive local, regional tourist destination?
Right.
All right, so we vote on that language to add it to in between the second and the third bullets. All those agree with that language? Unanimous? So, Craig, back to your point about the term economic generator.
I'd be okay to leave it the way it is.
Okay, so how about we vote on that entire goal with the inclusion of remain an attractive local regional tourist destination? So all those in favor? Seeing unanimous. And that takes us to policy ED1. Downtown should be Littleton Civic Center and a regional destination as well as an economic generator. No comments? Should we vote? All right,
Civic
let's,
Center, that's where Town Hall is, that's where the police station is, that's where the library is, that's where the museum is. Cultural Center, Emotional Center, or something or other, but Civic Center?
I think cultural works really well there.
Yeah, I mean, just I'm thinking in terms of Civic Center, what you usually think, oh, what's around the Civic Center in Denver?
Oh, the cultural.
City and county building and the cultural, well, city and county building and government, that sort of thing. Oh, okay, sorry, okay, I'm slipping into the downtown area versus downtown. Never
so
mind.
what about the suggestion to change civic to cultural? What do you guys think?
My only concern about that is that we do have the museum and the library not in downtown.
You know,
So,
in that sense, and taking downtown as the whole area. Obviously, emotionally, I haven't wedded myself to the idea of the transition from central area to downtown. But
How many agree to leave it as is with civic? All those in favor? It is Craig's against. All right, should we vote on ED1? All those in favor of ED1 as written? And Craig's against? And that brings us to ED1A, retain existing civic facilities such as government offices and the United States Post Office. And I have a note that says that we need to kind of discuss that.
how do we propose to do that?
How can we do this, is my question.
well, one thing is, I think when we have proposals for moving city offices, I think we've got some control as a city over that. The post office is a little tougher, you're right.
Post office, county governments,
I'm sorry?
county.
The county office is very difficult. I think you certainly says that's an incentive for us. What can we do to work with you, to keep you here? Post office, same thing. We've had a discussion about parking, for example, with the parking lot downtown. If the city council decides not to go into contract with that, or the property owner decides not to go into contract with the city council on that, then how do we work with the post office, to make sure that their employees have parking, for example, because it's an important generator for downtown, important use for downtown. So I think there's certain things you can do, kind of day-to-day actions, in terms of, okay, that's a priority to have them here, well, then we better step up to the table in terms of figuring out what their needs are and how we keep them. It's kind of that, I'm not sure it's predictable.
Here's what worries me. Within what limits? If Arapahoe County comes and says, well, we want to expand our government, we want to keep the offices there, but in order to do that, we're going to have to make some changes, and that doesn't really comply with your design standards and guidelines, would city staff reading this say, oh, gee, but our goal is to retain them, so yeah, we better give in. I mean, that's what worries me. It's kind of vague.
Well, and still, it'd have to go through, most of these things go through city council, and a lot of them go through planning commission as well, so you can certainly soften that if you feel more comfortable.
Make reasonable efforts sounds just as wishy-washy as it is, so.
How many people agree with this in concept without looking at the wording? Do we want to retain Arapahoe County or the United States Post Office? I mean, do we all agree in concept? So, yeah, it's unanimous. So how do we word this to make it more effective? Or leave the wording as is?
I don't think you're going to improve it.
Yeah, I don't think so.
I vote for that.
All right,
Yeah.
so should we take a vote?
Passes.
All those in favor of ED through 1A? It's unanimous. ED1B, seek to ensure that downtown is the first place considered for any new governmental, civic, or cultural facility.
I don't think we should have the first place. I'd say for
Oh.
appropriate governmental, civic, or cultural facility.
Jenny, sorry.
And actually, also adding in higher education to have the Arapahoe Community College, so if I think that's a great priority to have in our downtown.
So we're saying seek to ensure that downtown is considered
Yeah.
for any new government,
Pretty appropriate now, is that?
Yeah.
Mark?
higher education, civic, or cultural facility? All those in favor? No, go ahead.
Benny was going to add educational.
Higher education.
Higher education.
Higher education. Yeah, I've got that in.
So government, civic, cultural, or higher education.
And the only other thing I'd consider is how are we seeking to ensure? Are we marketing ourselves? Are there tools we're going to use to do that?
That would be part of it. Actively talking with any of those entities the first time any rumor comes up that they got a place to, they need a place to put something or expand. They're talking about, for example, if Arapahoe County would be talking about having to relocate a particular department down at their existing building because there isn't enough space. Well, give us a chance. Let's talk. Let's see what we can work out.
My only other comment was, instead of say seek to ensure, just say ensure.
Ensure.
Yeah, and get rid of that extra 2 words. It might save us some space.
By all means, let's start worrying about saving ink at this point. Yeah.
Hey, we all doing our part.
It isn't any more meaningless than retain or whatever. Sure.
So, should we go ahead and vote on that, deleting seek to and with the changes we talked about?
So can I
You want me
just,
to read it?
Yes, please.
Ensure that downtown is considered for any new appropriate government, civic, higher education, or cultural facility.
Craig, you had a comment?
no, that was, I just wanted it read back, so, thanks.
All those in favor? Unanimous. And ED2, the city's economic gardening program should continue to support new and existing businesses. All those in favor? Unanimous?
About puppy dogs and never mind.
See here, does the South Platte, the Humane Society, the South Platte Valley, is that part of the downtown area? No.
Yeah, I'm a little, this really, I'd like to think that eventually we're going to move this to community-wide. Yes, Pavlos, we will have a community-wide section.
All right.
So just for future reference, put an asterisk by it. We may have to go back up, and some of the others ought to go there too, but
Okay, so we're at ED2A, continue to offer professional level support services to new and existing businesses. What is professional level?
And same question. Is that your department?
No, it's BIA, and it's part of their mission statements is professional level, is that they actually feel like they compete with services that you would contract for. So that's what they're referring to in terms of professional level. It's, they really get the best quality information they can provide and provide for free. So.
Couldn't, instead of having to do it, because there really isn't anything we have to do to implement this, it's already there. Instead of having an E2 or ED2A and an ED2B, couldn't we just change the first one, say the city's economic gardening program should continue to support new and existing businesses? Sorry. Let me try this. The city's economic gardening program should continue to offer professional quality support services using up-to-date technologies for new and existing businesses. Cutting edge bothers me.
The only thing is that we have, this is a policy, and then EDA, 2A and 2B, of course, your implementation strategies for how you do that. So you'd be including everything into your policy. It wouldn't have any implementation strategies for doing it.
We don't need an implementation strategy because it's already there. All we're saying is the policy should continue.
Well, let's address that separately. All those in favor of collapsing the implementation strategies into the policy?
Okay.
Seeing none, so let's just take the ED2A then separately. Any comments or changes?
Can we wrap in, just have one implementation, combine the two together, since we don't really, it sounds like, need to do much with the implementation?
I think that where this came from, this ED2B, was, and we changed it to cutting-edge technologies. We originally had GIS systems in there because that's something that is lacking at this point. And we didn't want to put something as specific as GIS because tomorrow it could be called something else, and, you know, but that's where that came from, so. I think it was felt during that discussion that if we put it in here as something that was needed for them, that could also be helpful to the city as a whole, because we get lots of questions, and Chris gets lots of questions that he can't answer because he doesn't have that cutting-edge technology.
Actually, we don't have it, but he does.
Yeah, but if you remember the questions that the commission gave to Chris,
Right.
part of his answers back were, I can't tell you the answer to that because I don't have
Okay, right.
information. So that's where it came from.
So all those in favor of collapsing ED2A and ED2B into one implementation strategy, raise their hand. Craig? And Jenny, oh, and Matt? So 3 and 3, the motion fails. So let's take ED2A again. All those in favor of ED2A? And that is unanimous. And ED2B, continue to use the cutting-edge technologies to promote businesses. Yeah, all those in favor? So we've got 3 and 3.
The difference between cutting edge, bleeding edge, current, up to date, you know, it's whatever Chris can persuade the city manager to fund.
And Matt, your concern with 3B, or 2B was,
I just don't understand what the technology is, so I'm sort of deferring.
okay, just curious. All right, so that takes us to ED3, and we have, 33 minutes to finish this section and 3 more sections.
No problem.
No problem. So ED3 downtown should promote a business environment that attracts and retains businesses. All those in favor?
No, wait a minute. Somebody going to describe, yeah, I thought you were going to ask a question, and then everyone started voting for it.
Well, I saw Kirk's go up.
So we're going to say downtown should provide a business environment that attracts and retains businesses, but we're not going to describe what that is or indicate what any elements are that might actually do that.
But we do that with the implementation strategy, to collaborate with merchants and review rules and regulations for the impact. So, I mean, we kind of say that.
That's all that's going to, okay.
Do we need to add?
I mean, I think it's a very broad, policy in terms of what you're doing, because it gets into your infrastructure, it gets into everything. These are just a little bit more focused in terms of what's economic development. But I agree. I mean, it's hard to cover everything in that one.
Well, it just occurs to me that an essential part of comp plan for the downtown area should actually be describing the elements and the arrangement of elements and the character of those elements that do provide that kind of business environment.
So what do you see as those elements? And can we add them as implementation strategies? I can't pronounce those words.
I think those elements have been identified all over the place.
They're diffused throughout, or should be.
Sidewalks,
Right.
building standards.
Arrangements of businesses, arrangements of buildings next to sidewalks to generate activity. That is what comp plan is all about. It just seems kind of weak to be making a statement like that here. And then as we work down to the implementation strategies.
Well, let's vote on the policy first.
So would it make sense to say something like that we should continually revisit our comp plan to make sure that the elements of it are business friendly? Because
We do say revisit the comp plan somewhere in here.
I know
But
at
it's
least
not
one
for
developer
business.
whose definition of business friendly is waive all of my parking requirements when I develop my business. Oh, never mind, he already did that. That's what worries me about phrases like business friendly, Mark. Business friendly, saying business friendly without balancing it against the other elements that need to make downtown vital are dangerous move.
So should we go ahead and vote on ED3? So all those in favor of ED3 as the policy itself? And that is everybody except Matt. And then ED3A, continue to collaborate with merchants and property owners to enhance economic activity. I'm kind of wondering what continue to means.
Yeah, I'd love to see a couple of examples there.
Oh, in terms of what the city's been doing it with merchants?
Right, well, just to set some kind of
Sure.
parameters or something.
I don't, it'd be interesting.
Again, I don't want to write a blank check.
It's going to evolve over time. I think what the city has done, of course, is the city pays for the Christmas lights. City puts up the lights. It pays for the electricity. It puts up the banners. It provides the staff that puts up the banners on a regular basis for whatever's happening downtown. It historically has provided police protection and fire protection for special events. It's that type of stuff that we were talking about. The city helped fund the Originals, which is the coalition of different business organizations that Hoodlum belongs to. It gave startup money for that. So there's a whole series of things, I think, soft costs and hard costs that the city has provided. And
So they're both special events and normal.
Yeah, and I don't know if you want to specify those or just say it
Day-to-day
kind of depends on the situation. And a lot of it gets into just coordination, too. One of the things we've heard is there's concerns about signage. Is there enough signage downtown for the merchants? Social events, are the city rules and regs too restrictive for the special events? Is there a way we can be more accommodating, or is there a way we can do what we built into the zoning for Aspen Grove, for example, where we've got a set number of events that can occur or types of events that can occur, and they just check with us on a periodic basis instead of having to get permits each time. So could you get collective permits? So I think there are lots of options, but it really kind of evolves. It depends on what people are talking about.
You're hoisting me by my own petard, so
Okay.
it's getting too complicated. You're right. I should just back off and live with the generalized statements.
Can we vote on ED3A? All those in favor of ED3A? That's unanimous. How about ED3B? Review the city's rules and regulations for their impact on providing an attractive business environment and make necessary revisions.
Could I suggest changing rules and regulations to regulations and procedures, which at least is finally getting back to one of the important elements identified through our community outreach 2 years ago?
So delete rules.
And I guess I'd also suggest that what we're really looking for is their impact, not just on providing an attractive business environment. Well, maybe it is. Maybe I'm getting swamped in detail again, but I think it's their impact on inhibiting or facilitating an attractive business environment. Because that's what part of the problem with some of the regulations and procedures we've been dealing with for the last few years, at least according to the businessmen we've talked to, have been doing.
So you're suggesting adding, so deleting rules and...
Yeah, say
and then
review the
deregulate-
city's regulations and procedures for their impact inhibiting or facilitating an attractive business environment.
So let's take, how many agree that we should change rules to regulations and procedures? That's unanimous. And then what about for their impact on inhibiting or facilitating?
Forget I said it. Just live with the general providing.
Okay.
Instead of confusing everybody.
So with those changes, all those who support ED3B? Unanimous? And then we have a note that says, an issue that needs further discussion. To continue to be economically successful, downtown must balance the needs of businesses with those residents, since the health of downtown depends on both sectors. That kind of gets to, Dave, one of your points that you mentioned with a goal.
Well, yeah, in general terms. I think what it's specifically, Dennis, did you generate this note? Was it?
Yeah.
That's probably going back to our discussion about what kind of downtown residential is going to contribute to what kind of economic activity, et cetera.
It does, and also the needs are very distinct when you get into a mixed-use area, and how do you meet all those needs, or how do you balance them? So.
Right, and we've heard from businessmen who said, if you're going to have residential construction downtown, that's great, but make sure they're wealthy, young, free-spending, active people. Don't give us the older people, don't give us the people in the form. Well, seriously, that is the kind of thing we've heard.
And that they don't mind our trash collection at first thing in the morning.
Right.
And that they don't mind that we have special events downtown. And that they don't mind, so it's all that stuff in terms of, you've got real competing demands here and some needs. So you've got to figure out, how do you work all that together?
Do we want to add this as a part of the goal, or do we want to add it as a separate policy, or add it as an implementation strategy?
And I'm not sure balance is the right word even. I mean, I think there may be another word that makes sense in terms of how do you adjust for all this.
If I could make a
Accommodate.
suggestion,
Maybe accommodate.
if in concept, the commissioners feel like we need something like this, then we can work with, Dennis and I can work with Linda and Craig to come up with something to come back
Bring
with,
back at next meeting.
rather than try to craft it here.
Actually, I kind of like most of the phrasing in here, other than that note and issue that needs further discussion. Basically, to continue to be economically successful, downtown must balance the needs of business with those of residents, I'd say even and visitors, since the health of downtown depends on both sectors. And it does.
Can we just stop at businesses with those residents, period, and then don't need to say, since the health of downtown depends on both sectors?
No, I
you
think
need that.
emphasizing the relationship between the two is important. The details are still going to be a struggle, depending on the businessman in question.
So would that then become ED 3C or 4?
Say 4.
I'd say 4.
And then how you can come up with some implementation.
Probably do.
No.
Okay, so for ED4, it will say, to continue to be economically successful, downtown must balance the needs of businesses with those of residents, since the health of downtown depends on both sectors. So everybody, and then we'll also address implementation strategies.
We've got a simple
Okay.
implementation strategy, but let's vote on this one first.
Okay, what do you guys vote?
Yep.
Everyone's in favor? And next is implementation strategies.
Just think about it, people. Seriously, most of this is a no-brainer for anybody who pays any attention to what goes on downtown and what's necessary from day to day, morning to night, weekdays and weekends. If this isn't self-evident, then
We're in
somebody's
suspense
not paying
here.
attention.
We're in suspense. You're
No, I mean
serious.
exactly what I said. Just wake up, people. I mean, this is obvious. This should be self-evident. This is not so much a policy as it is a reminder. And I don't
Should
know.
it be in a goal rather than a policy? As part of the goal statement?
Maybe not a bad idea, Mark.
We can add that to the existing goal statement back here.
So what would the language be to add to the existing goal statement?
I just take the whole statement and add it after the other stuff we've already talked about. Downtown will be an important economic generator. That's a reminder to continue to be economically successful downtown. I think Mark's right onto something.
So instead of ED4, we move that to,
Second sentence of the, after generator.
Goes.
is the fifth bullet.
I think it's this and these come together, and then there's another sentence.
So add that as the fifth bullet onto the goal for economic development and do not include it.
No, I think it's
Separate
a
statement.
separate statement. In other words, this one is,
It's kind of a summary or a
Okay.
conclusion or a thematic statement, Mark.
it goes parallel to this.
I'm sorry, we're adding that to the goals, a separate statement?
Yeah, separate statement. So it's not a bullet point under
Not a bullet.
downtown will be an important economic generator through, it's a separate statement
We
there.
have two goals.
No,
It's just a,
wrap-up.
Oh,
I like it as a conclusion. I agree with that.
Yeah. Completes the thought.
Right.
It's underscoring.
Right.
So all those in favor of moving that over to the goal? Unanimous? And anything else related to economic development? So we can move forward?
And I'm going to congratulate ourselves for ducking any suggestion that we're going to favor downtown businesses and economic development over any other economic activity in the center, because a year and a half ago, that was a serious issue.
All right, historical preservation.
We did
that. Yay.
That was fast.
That was really
go. When we get through all the comments and come back, we do have some initial comments that we had from the Historic Preservation Board that we'll want to talk about when we go back through our comments as well.
So we'll talk about that.
I think so, if that's right. Yeah.
Or the next meeting. Okay. And parks, trails, and public spaces, as opposed to open spaces. The goal is parks will provide opportunities for both passive and active recreation. Public places will provide gathering spaces and an identity for downtown. Trails and connections will link downtown to the surrounding parks, open spaces, and the regional trail system. The city will maintain its commitment to improve and enhance trails and public spaces. That's a lot.
I like it. Will all parks provide opportunities?
That was my question. All parks would provide opportunities for recreation. Are we going to have, Geneva Park doesn't have any active recreation in it now, does it?
Right.
And yet we heard from some of the people living over in the R5 neighborhood, they'd certainly be happy if it did.
Well, are there really space available to have ball fields in the downtown area?
No, I don't think that that's what that means. I guess what I thought that meant, and actually you see it in Geneva Park now, you see people out playing Frisbee. It's not a ballpark, but they can,
It's active.
Somebody will be reading a book, that's passive. Somebody will be playing with a Frisbee or their dog, that's active. So it's not organizational.
It's just active as opposed to sitting there relaxing, enjoying the flowers over between the library and the museum, for example, or in Bega Park.
Or driving by and seeing it, and it's pretty, yeah.
It's just, in the past, we've kind of degenerated into talking about all parks being all things to all people. They can't.
But,
Okay?
yeah.
If a park is going to be contemplative and relaxing, it doesn't add to that by putting a little merry-go-round next to it for kids that rarely are there.
And the intent was that this would be collective, that together the parks would provide this, and there'd be individual roles for each park. But if it's not clear, we need to clarify that.
Well, I'm just suggesting that we indicate that we're aware of the fact that it's going to provide passive and active recreation, but tailored to individual situations, circumstances, needs, something.
Well, let's take each sentence.
Could say together the parks will, or something like that, will provide opportunities for both passive and active recreation.
Together,
Together, comma, the parks will.
collectively.
I think I'd rather be specific about we're going to tailor it to individual circumstances.
So let's just take the first sentence and who agrees with the language, parks will provide opportunities for both passive and active recreation, and then we'll go address the together or collectively issue. Who agrees with that? It is Kurt against. And what about adding together? I don't know what together means, but
Doesn't matter.
Pardon?
It was 5-1. Let's go.
Well, no, she was getting the 5-1 just for the basic.
Should we add collective to that?
Collectively, the parks will provide, something to that effect?
I like that line.
Collectively?
So all those in favor of adding collectively to that sentence? That is Kurt. Dave against. And then how about the next sentence? Public places will provide gathering spaces and an identity for downtown. Should we just go ahead and vote? All those in favor of that sentence?
So public places, as in Geneva Park, that's going to provide an identity for downtown?
I think that what we're trying to get to here, I mean, certainly Geneva Park would be part of that, but in a space-constrained downtown where you really don't have a lot of opportunity to add parks and plazas and open space and the kinds of things that Craig was talking about earlier, from time to time, well, actually all the time, the sidewalks become part of your public realm. The
Okay, no,
that's
you
what it
made a
is.
case, yeah.
Okay.
So all those in favor of public spaces, places, not spaces, everybody's in favor. Trail and connections will link downtown to the surrounding parks, open spaces, and regional trail system. All those in favor of this? All right, and the city will maintain its commitment to improve and enhance parks, trails, and public spaces. And is everyone in favor? Policies and implementation strategies, parks should be enhanced to encourage their use. Ready to vote?
Something wrong with the parks?
Well, what we heard from the neighbors in a couple meetings was that, for example, if your grandkids are here, there's no playground downtown. Or if we also heard from people who were shoppers downtown. They said, yeah, there's no great place for my kids to kind of cool off after they've been shopping with me for an hour or been to the restaurant. What do they do to get their activity leveled down a little bit? So it's that kind of stuff, that specific needs, I think. And we heard from some other neighbors that would like a little bit more active use downtown.
As long as we don't add an active play structure and area in Bega Park for the 5 or 6 kids in a day who might show up, and take away the quiet, calm lunch retreat for the 20 or 30 or more business people and employees who use it every day, that's fine.
the next implementation strategy. So should we vote on parks should be enhanced to encourage their use? All those in favor? And that is Kurt and Dave against. How about identifying opportunities for improvement of Bega and Geneva parks? Jenny?
I almost wonder if you wouldn't separate out Bega from Geneva Park.
Well, if we were specifying particular opportunities, I'd agree with you. But all it is
Because-
saying identify opportunities, so that could be anything.
Right, because I would like to see something with Geneva Park in there that talks about providing something that's for children to have playgrounds or something
While still
in there.
recognizing that there are there's the county building nearby. I don't know, has anybody ever noticed how many employees from the county building ever go over to
A lot.
Geneva Park for lunch? So I want to make sure
Would
that
there
we
be
provided,
zones or-
we recognize that it's going to be very different uses. We have to arrange carefully how that works out.
So all those in favor of separating as a implementation strategy, Bega Park and Geneva Parks all those in favor?
If we're going to be specific about what kind of improvements we're talking about, yeah.
We're not going to be specific.
Okay, then don't worry about it.
Pardon?
We're not going to be specific in comp plan of what improvements are going to be in the parks.
Well, if we're going to mention
That
Bega
detail?
and Geneva, then we probably ought to start throwing out some of the criteria we were just talking about. We're not going to turn Bega Park into a kiddie playground.
Okay.
Yeah,
Inappropriate.
I think we could be more specific, that we don't have to say exactly what's going to be out
Improve
there.
Bega Park as an urban retreat or something. Improve Geneva as both a lunchtime retreat and children or family-friendly, provide friendly activities. We're not doing specifics as far as how many structures or that sort of thing, but we're trying to give guidelines to the city staff to start developing these improvements, looking at which direction are we trying to go.
So Jenny, would it work if we actually separated those two as implementation strategies for you? So who agrees with that in concept? That is everybody. And then now to separate Geneva Park from Bega, do we have any suggested language? I heard improve Geneva Park as a family-friendly environment.
Let me take a shot at it here. Identify opportunities for improvement of Bega Park as a passive use park.
This presumes that we'd never suggest that as a farmer's market venue. Just throwing that out there in case we would be thinking about that.
Jenny?
That's a passive use, isn't it?
Unless there's its primary function is a passive park, however, it could have events. I mean,
So
we could have a
include
primary,
events?
so
Or primarily as a passive use
primarily
park.
as a primary.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, so let's vote on that. This would be P1A, right? Identify opportunities for Bega Park primarily as a passive use park. All those in favor, unanimous. And then P1B regarding Geneva Park. Any suggestions?
Same thing, but passive and active use park.
Okay, so the language is identify opportunities for Geneva Park primarily as a passive park with active uses, or
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I like that. With active uses for all ages, or
with active
Just
uses
say
for...
mix
I
of
think
passive
we
and
take out the
active.
word primarily.
Yeah,
and
just say a mix of passive and active uses.
Right, so identify opportunities for Geneva Park with a mix of uses. Is that
Mix
it?
of passive and
Active and
active
passive.
uses.
Active uses, okay. So all those, does that address
all ages thing.
what you think, Jenny, or do you want to add with all ages?
I just wonder, I hope it's either understood that when we talk about active uses, that would include family-friendly active uses. But I guess as parks, do you think that's generally
We're not talking
understood?
about putting a soccer field. We're
No.
saying
Oh,
like
no.
a playground or
No.
something like that.
How about this? Identify opportunities for improvement of Geneva Park as a family-friendly park with a mix of passive and active uses. Go for it.
All right, all those in favor of that verbiage? And that's unanimous. And why don't we stop here and talk about the next meetings, and if we want to continue on today, or how we want to go ahead and approach finishing these goals and policies.
We just have sustainability after this, right? And then the summary.
Then we'll have to address, and one of the things that we did talk about is at the next meeting, Dennis, do you want to address the framework?
Yeah, absolutely. We've made some changes to the framework. We wanted to hand that out tonight. It's based on the comments we've gotten, and then we thought we would give you an opportunity to look at it. If you get comments back to us by next Monday, that would be fantastic. Just email them to us, and we'll incorporate, or at least collect those and have that discussion at the next meeting.
And the intent is to save us some time to consolidate that, so we can kind of go through this pretty quickly to agree whether we approve it or not. So that takes care of the framework. We still got all the other components that we really need to look at. You know, for example, the executive summary, the introduction, and all of those components.
Yeah, with the thought that we were saying, once we got through these, we want to go back and just make sure we're consistent in the vision statement, in all those other areas that we're talking about. The executive summary, for example, was written before we made these revisions, of course. So.
Let me bring this up. Is the format still working? Or is there anything that we can do to really expedite the process?
If we break into subgroups, three
Yeah,
people
we
take
can do that.
responsibility for a section.
We can't do that based on the open meetings law.
Carol Breezick would be all over us. Most
And-
faithful advocate, city advocate for sunshine law.
And to me, if we're looking at this together, then we can, when we go to the public meetings, it will be easier to talk, for everybody to talk about the different components and address anything that comes up. That's just my personal preference. So now, we started the parks and, we should be able to get through the parks and open space and sustainability and framework easily next time. But, yeah, easily, and then maybe we can then come up with a plan to finish up the rest of the plan? If not finish it up? That probably won't happen, but,
We haven't even talked about the front end, have we?
no, we have not talked about the front end and all the other components that exist. And one of the things that, Dennis, I think you're going to do is all the changes that we made that were somewhat confusing, we'll have that draft back to us at maybe the next meeting, so that we can just then go over all the goals and policies to make sure that it's exactly what we wanted and that we didn't miss something totally. So, any other suggestions? Should we see if we can get a few more policies done? We have 4 minutes.
Or we could go home and eat dinner.
Pardon?
Or we could go home and eat dinner.
Oh, no, sorry. Oh,
Or we can sing happy birthday,
yes,
that's right.
absolutely. Today is Craig's birthday. And I'd like to wish him success.
For that.
And I think we have a cane back there. I feel that way a lot of days. All right, so we had finished P1A, and we have 4 minutes. So P2 is development along park edges should encourage public interaction.
This is really addressing some of the blank wall issues. For example, along Beagle Park, where there's an opportunity, and maybe it's a redevelopment opportunity, maybe you can't do something with what is already there, but in general, when a building goes against the park, you want to have some sort of interaction between the building and the park, rather than just a blank wall. That's what that means.
And I think at some point there may be an opportunity for that parking lot that belongs to Chase. You know,
Yeah.
you may look at that and say it'd be an ideal opportunity for getting active use. It'd just be a great attraction for drawing people, you know, from the light rail station over to Main Street to something that's active along there. It's a great little location. So.
I'd vote for it.
All right, all those in favor of that? P2, I'm sorry.
Remembering that one of the nice things about Vega Park is you have that blank wall, so you are protected from sound and activity and that sort of thing. So in some circumstances, constant interactivity may not be a good thing.
All right, P2A is require new development or redevelopment along park edges to encourage public interaction through the use of building entries, windows, public outdoor eating areas, or other design elements that open to the park. Do not allow blank walls along the park edges.
Remembering what Dave has said. So.
So
I
also,
think minimize, require, and encourage in the same sentence are contradictory.
good point.
So you could just take out require and replace encourage.
You guys agree with that?
Makes sense to me.
Okay. Yeah.
So instead of require new development, encourage new development or redevelopment.
To encourage, and it sounds redundant.
Well, but,
Oh.
So you could say
no, I think it's
choose.
got different intents.
Right.
The require is that you're going to put in provisions which you can't guarantee you're going to get that public interaction, but you can at least, I guess you could encourage development or redevelopment along park edges to encourage public interaction.
Or to include.
To include public interaction.
Yeah, encourage them to include. I think
You could say required, required to include. Require new development or redevelopment along park edges to include.
Or
And I don't
encourage.
think it's,
I like encourage better than require.
Yeah, but then you're saying encourage it to
I'm
encourage, which
with
is
you
what
there.
started marking off in the first place.
No,
so-
we're saying,
To include. Encourage to
okay.
include.
Encourage.
so encourage it to include public interaction.
So,
Well, then-
so
then-
can we,
Then instead of having the redundancy between the P2 and P2A, why not change P2 to promote public interaction?
okay.
Okay.
so let's take a vote on changing in P2 and changing encourage to promote.
No, keep encourage here and
Well,
put promote over here.
Well, I thought that's what he said. I thought
Yeah,
you said you
that
wanted
is
to
what he
change it.
said.
Yeah.
Oh, did you?
Uh-huh.
Are you taking out the whole first line then and starting with promote public
No,
interaction?
no, just substituting promote for encourage, so we don't have encourage cropping up 3 times in the next 20 words.
Okay,
And that's really what we're looking for. We aren't going to have, whatever happens along the development along the park edges isn't really going to encourage it. It's going to promote it by providing the kind of links that we were talking about, you're talking about in the implementation strategy.
All right, we're 10 seconds over. Do we want to go ahead and vote on P2 or just try to push through the parks, trails, and open space and just finish this, or just finish P2? What's your guys' preference? Finish P2?
Let's vote on P2A first.
Okay. But we're back to P2.
We're going to change encourage to promote in P2?
That was
Yes.
what I suggested.
That was David's suggestion. So it would read development along park edges should it promote public interaction. That's P2. And P2A would be a different discussion. That's my understanding.
Okay. I'm okay with changing P2.
So we're talking
Let's do P2 and
Just
P2A. I move for that.
separate. Okay. So P2, change encourage to promote.
Yes.
Unanimous. P2A. Sarah Jane, what would you?
Well, I think that the choices that I have written down here are require, which I crossed out, and then I had encourage. And then, so how it reads with the other change would be encourage new development or redevelopment along park edges to promote public interaction
Or stimulate.
or stimulate. That's a
Stimulate's
great
good.
one.
Ooh, like.
Yes. To stimulate public interaction, and then
Cattle
the rest
prods
is the
for
same.
everybody.
Can we take those separate? So for P2A, require new development, or all those in favor of the proposal to change require to encourage? So we have 5 against 1. So that is changed to encourage, and then changing encourage to stimulate.
So it's development along park edges to stimulate public interaction.
All those in favor? All right, so we're now at the end of P2A.
I think we just have to take out do not allow,
Yeah.
We have to take
Okay.
it out.
and then I think,
So eliminate that last sentence.
Yes.
yeah.
Totally eliminate the,
Well, generally, what we're talking about above is going to discourage blank walls, but at least it leaves open the opportunity if somebody says, look, here's why a blank wall in this particular location is.
do you think that we need to, well, let's vote on that, to delete that last sentence, do not allow blank walls, so that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against 1. Don't ask me why. So now, we do have P3, P4, and P5 to do for open space. Do we want to stay a little later, or do we want to just come back at a,
Next week.
Move to
oh,
adjourn.
Craig has his birthday, so do we have a movement to, do we have a second?
Second.
All right, so we are adjourned.